We turn now to the refugee crisis overwhelming Europe. New border restrictions have left more than 10,000 migrants stranded at the crossing between Greece and Macedonia. Food and supplies are running low, and conditions worsen with an overnight downpour. The backup also stretches south to Athens, where hundreds spent another day in an open square. European Union and Turkish leaders will discuss the crisis at a summit on Monday. I'm joined now by David O'Sullivan. He is the EU's ambassador to the United States. Mr. Ambassador, welcome back to the program.
Thank you very much.
From where we sit in the United States, this migrant crisis looks like it gone from a disaster to a catastrophe. How do you see it?
Well, this is the greatest refugee crisis we've faced since the Second World War. And of course, it's a global crisis, not just a crisis facing Europe. The neighboring countries of Syria have suffered hugely, large numbers of migrants in Lebanon, Jordan, and of course, Turkey. And of course, the European Union has seen an unprecedented increase in the number of refugees and asylum seekers, 1.25 million last year alone, which is double from the previous year. And this has certainly put our systems and our structures under strain. I think there's been a huge outpouring of compassion and goodwill by European citizens, but the fact is our systems are straining under the pressure of the outflows, and we've been struggling over the last few weeks to find a comprehensive solution. President Tusk has been touring in the region of the Balkans.
He's the head of the European
President of the European Council, and he's been touring in the Balkans and meeting, as you just said, with the Turkish leaders, and he has just issued a letter ahead of the very important meeting which will take place on Monday, which is not only with Turkey but also a further meeting of the European Council, indicating that he thinks there is a growing consensus emerging as to how we can find a comprehensive solution to this humanitarian tragedy.
And how would that work?
Well, it's a solution which necessarily has many parts. First of all, of course, we have to try and solve the problem in Syria, which is at the origin of this. We've had the cessation of hostilities. We're very grateful for what the United States in particular is doing in trying to broker a political settlement in Syria. We need to assist the neighboring countries, Jordan, Lebanon, and Turkey. We're the largest donor of humanitarian assistance to those countries, and we've just reached a new agreement to give Turkey an additional €3 billion in order to facilitate their management of the refugees within Turkey. In addition, we're hoping that Turkey will limit the outflow of migrants across the Aegean into Greece, because Greece is, as you've said, clearly facing unprecedented numbers and straining to cope. And we are working to help Greece and the other frontline states better to manage the situation. We've just agreed additional funds for humanitarian purposes within the European Union, which is an unprecedented step. And of course, we are also looking at relocating refugees and asylum seekers from the frontline states to other parts of the European Union in order better to distribute the burden of looking after these people.
But as country after country is either closing or severely tightening their borders, doesn't that make it much harder to find a solution here?
Well, I think we are seeing the closure of a number of frontiers or greater restrictions, but the fact is we have managed to set up now reception centers in Greece, in Italy. We are starting the process of relocating people from those centers into other parts of the European Union. We hope that these closures or these restrictions at frontiers are temporary and that they will in due course be removed once we get the situation more under control. We will, of course, need to tighten our controls at the external frontier, not to close them, not to turn away refugees, but just to make sure that the reception of refugees takes place in a more orderly and structured way. And of course, we will have to address the issue of economic migrants who will probably not be accepted as refugees and who will then have to return to the countries from which they came in due course.
What proportion of these migrants we are watching, stranded at the border are people who are genuinely fleeing a war zone, and how many or what percentage, or as you describe them, are looking for better economic opportunity, and they come from...
Difficult to have very precise numbers, but I would say the majority are indeed people fleeing from conflict, whether in Syria or in other parts of the world. But there is also a substantial minority who clearly are trying to make their way to Europe for understandable reasons of trying to make a better life, but not necessarily fleeing from a conflict, and they would probably not qualify under international law for refugee status or asylum.
Is this, we heard President Francois Hollande of France say a couple of weeks ago that this crisis threatens to break up the European Union. Do you think it's that close to dissolving this organization, this European?
I don't think the European Union is going to dissolve anytime soon. It's a very robust commitment of European people to the integration we've achieved, to the single currency, to the economic interests and political values which bind us together. But it is true, this crisis is creating strains and stresses between our member states, and we have to absolutely find a way better to manage the crisis in order to avoid that these strains become too severe. That's what we hope will happen at the meeting on Monday. It's a tedious process. We have 28 sovereign member states. We have the Western Balkans. We have Turkey. Trying to get a coordinated response through these different interests does take time, and sometimes decision-making in Europe can be slow. But I do believe that we are slowly moving towards a new phase in the crisis where we will be able much better to manage it from Monday on.
David O'Sullivan, the European Union Ambassador to the United States, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.